Have you ever wondered how a curious child, born in the heart of the Soviet Union, rose to become one of the creators of the world's most powerful search engine? This isn't just the story of a tech genius. It's the story of resilience, risk, imagination, and the unwavering belief that knowledge should be free for all. Sergey Brin was born in Moscow on August 21, 1973, during a time when the Soviet Union wasn't kind to dreamers, especially Jewish ones. His parents, both highly educated mathematicians, knew the limits of their environment. They understood that in a place ruled by fear, restriction, and suspicion, their son would never truly have the freedom to think, to create, or to question. So they made a decision that would change their lives forever. When Sergey was just 6 years old, the Brin family left everything they knew behind and moved to the United States, seeking not luxury, but liberty. In America, Sergey was no ordinary immigrant child. He had an insatiable hunger for knowledge. He devoured books, explored science fairs, and played with computers when most kids his age were still learning to ride bikes. But he also faced challenges. He was different. His accent, his clothes, his curiosity, they all set him apart. Yet, instead of hiding, Sergey leaned in. He made being different his superpower. At home, his parents never let him forget where he came from. His mother, a scientist at NASA, and his father, a mathematics professor, constantly reminded him of the sacrifices they made, not to pressure him, but to empower him. They didn't tell him what to be. They just reminded him of who he was, someone who had crossed oceans for freedom, someone who could now dream without limits. Sergey didn't just want to fit into America. He wanted to contribute to it. After graduating from Eleanor Roosevelt High School in Maryland, he attended the University of Maryland at just 17. There, he studied computer science and mathematics with the intensity of someone who knew time was precious. His professors quickly saw that this wasn't just another bright student. This was someone who thought differently, someone who questioned everything, not for the sake of rebellion, but for the sake of clarity. But it was at Stanford University where lightning struck. Stanford in the 1990s was a playground for visionaries. It was the same campus that had produced some of the brightest minds in Silicon Valley. Sergey entered the PhD program in computer science, but he didn't come alone. Fate introduced him to a fellow student, Larry Page. Their first meeting? Not friendly. They debated fiercely, challenged each other constantly, and clashed over ideas. But as often happens with great partnerships, that friction sparked fire. Sergey and Larry shared a frustration. The internet was exploding with information, but it was chaotic. Search engines of the time were clumsy, commercial, and incomplete. People couldn't find what they were really looking for. Together, they started working on a new kind of search algorithm, one that didn't just count keywords, but understood importance, relevance, and connections. The project began in their dorm room. With cables running across the floor and servers made from cheap parts, they created something revolutionary, a search engine that ranked pages based on how many other pages linked to them. It was smart. It was fast. It was honest. They called it Backrub, yes, seriously. But eventually, they realized they needed a better name, something playful, powerful, and global. They settled on a name inspired by a number so big, it stretched imagination. Google. At first, nobody believed in them. Investors laughed. Companies turned them away. People said the internet was just a fad, and that search engines had already peaked. But Sergey didn't blink. He knew that if people could access knowledge freely, the world would change. So they kept building. They moved their tiny operation into a friend's garage. They coded day and night. They lived off ramen and pizza. They didn't just want to build a business. They wanted to build a better world. And slowly, it worked. By 1999, Google was no longer a dorm room dream. It was becoming the backbone of the internet. And Sergey, once the immigrant kid from Moscow, was now one of its architects. But what made Sergey different wasn't just his brilliance. It was his ethics. He didn't chase profit first. He chased principles. He believed that knowledge should never be sold to the highest bidder. He pushed for clean, minimal design. No flashing ads, no distractions, just pure, powerful access to information. As Google grew, so did the responsibility. Sergey never wanted to become a corporate robot. He wore rollerblades to work. He encouraged employees to challenge their bosses. He even insisted on a company policy that allowed engineers to spend 20% of their time on personal projects, some of which later became Gmail and Google Maps. But success didn't shield him from struggle. When Google went public in 2004, it became one of the biggest tech IPOs in history. Sergey became a billionaire overnight. Yet, he kept asking himself the same question: what's next? Not in terms of money, but in meaning. He wanted to solve bigger problems, global problems. With his co-founder, he created Google X, the moonshot division of the company. Here they explored wild, futuristic ideas like self-driving cars, smart glasses, and internet balloons floating in the sky. Sergey believed that technology should serve humanity, not just entertain it. But behind the scenes, Sergey was also evolving. He became more private, more focused, and more selective with his time. He married Anne Wojcicki, a biotech entrepreneur, and together they explored the intersection of health, DNA, and the future of human well-being. Though their marriage later ended, their shared vision of a better world remained. What never changed was Sergey's belief in freedom. The boy who escaped Soviet censorship had now created the world's most powerful information gateway. He took that responsibility seriously. He stood up against government demands for user data. He advocated for internet freedom across the globe. And even as criticism mounted about Google's power, Sergey kept asking the hard questions. Are we doing what's right? He wasn't perfect. No visionary is. But Sergey never stopped dreaming. As the world became more digital, Sergey Brin became more philosophical. He had seen what unchecked power could do, both in governments and corporations. While Google had grown into a tech titan, Sergey kept reminding himself why he started it in the first place: to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. It wasn't just a company mission, it was his personal oath. Inside the Googleplex, Sergey wasn't just a co-founder anymore. He was a cultural force, driven by curiosity, not comfort. He never wanted to be the guy in the corner office who wore a suit and signed papers. He wanted to be the guy on the lab floor, getting his hands dirty, asking big questions. What if we could cure aging? What if we could connect rural villages to the internet from space? What if artificial intelligence could help solve the climate crisis? That thinking led to the formation of Alphabet Inc. in 2015. Sergey and Larry decided to restructure Google. It was rooted in his blood. When he discovered he carried a mutation in the LRRK2 gene associated with Parkinson's disease, a condition his mother suffered from. It changed everything. It wasn't just about innovation anymore. It was about survival. It was about legacy. It was about using wealth not to separate from the world, but to heal it. Sergey began funding one of the most ambitious biomedical research efforts ever attempted in Parkinson's. He didn't just write checks. He got involved. He met with researchers, visited labs, and engaged with patients. He didn't want just treatments. He wanted a cure. That kind of thinking, unapologetically bold, is what's defined him from the very beginning. In Sergey's world, no problem is too big, no system too broken, and no idea too wild to chase. Even as he worked in private, his presence loomed large in Silicon Valley. Younger entrepreneurs often looked to him not as a businessman, but as a builder of purpose-driven futures. He was the reminder that tech could have a soul, that algorithms could serve humanity, not enslave it. He had no interest in quarterly results or trending topics. What fascinated him were the patterns behind human behavior, the signals in chaos, and the future of intelligence itself. Artificial intelligence, in particular, captivated Sergey in ways few people understood. He didn't see AI as a threat to replace humans. He saw it as a tool to better understand humanity. He envisioned a world where machines could diagnose illnesses before symptoms appear, where personalized learning could unlock every child's potential, and where climate models could predict catastrophe before it strikes. For him, AI wasn't about replacing jobs. It was about elevating human capacity. But Sergey also carried caution. He understood power. He'd seen what unchecked control could do, from his childhood in Soviet Russia to the global reach of his own company. That's why, even as AI advanced, he advocated for ethical frameworks, global cooperation, and transparency. He wasn't afraid of progress. He was afraid of careless progress. This balance between boldness and responsibility has always defined Sergey's character. He doesn't speak often in public, but when he does, it's with measured thought, subtle humor, and unmistakable intelligence. He doesn't dominate with words. He persuades with clarity. Away from tech, Sergey found peace in quieter pursuits. He developed a love for sailing, for high-altitude flying, for outdoor exploration. He once said that flying made him feel small again, in the best way possible. It reminded him that no matter how far technology advanced, the universe remained vast and humbling. His children became a focal point in his life. He wanted them to grow up grounded, curious, and kind. He didn't want them to inherit just wealth. He wanted them to inherit wisdom. In a world obsessed with likes and followers, Sergey taught them to ask better questions, not chase louder answers, to listen before speaking, to think before reacting. In the years following his formal exit from Alphabet, Sergey's influence didn't diminish. It deepened. He became something of a mythical figure in the tech world, not because he vanished, but because his silence spoke volumes. He showed that true leaders don't need to be loud. They need to be right where they're needed, often unseen but always present. And quietly, behind the scenes, he continued to back some of the world's most daring ideas, like brain-computer interfaces, climate engineering, and synthetic biology. To Sergey, every limit was an invitation to imagine beyond it. Yet he never lost sight of his origins. He often reflected on his family's escape from the Soviet regime, the fear they carried, the courage they summoned, and the dreams they nurtured in silence. He remembered the discrimination his parents faced, the way doors had been closed because of their name, their beliefs, their ancestry. And he contrasted that with the doors he was now opening, not just for himself, but for the world. Sergey Brin's story is more than the tale of a tech mogul. It's the story of what happens when freedom meets imagination, when discipline meets play, when intelligence is guided by conscience. In rural America, in small-town schools where students are learning English one sentence at a time, Sergey's story matters because it tells them that their voice matters, that their ideas, no matter how strange or uncertain, can become reality, that their background isn't a barrier, it's a beginning. And for every immigrant child, every quiet thinker, every curious mind that's been told they're too different, too weird, too unrealistic, Sergey Brin stands as living proof that those very differences are what change the world. He didn't start with money. He started with meaning. He didn't aim for power. He aimed for purpose. And that made all the difference. There's a rare kind of silence that follows real greatness. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to trend or be liked. It simply builds, serves, and transforms. Sergey Brin belongs to that silence, the quiet force behind the architecture of our digital age, a man who could have chased power, but instead chased purpose, a mind trained not just in mathematics, but in morality, a heart shaped not by luxury, but by longing, for justice, for knowledge, for freedom. As the years moved forward, Sergey's legacy began to take shape, not in golden awards or magazine covers, but in the lives he touched through the tools he built. A farmer in Arkansas using Google Earth to monitor soil health. A teenage coder in Kentucky learning Python from YouTube tutorials. A mother in rural Nebraska using Google Translate to talk with her child's ESL teacher. A veteran in Ohio searching for mental health services. They didn't know his name, but they were living in the world he helped design. And perhaps that was his greatest gift. Building systems that empowered the voiceless. Sergey didn't just create a search engine. He created access. In a world where information used to belong to the few, he helped give it to the many. That was his quiet rebellion against control, against the kind of regime he fled as a child, against systems that said, only the elite should know. But even Sergey knew that access alone wasn't enough. The internet was growing darker too, rife with misinformation, division, and manipulation. The same tools that could liberate were now being used to deceive. Sergey didn't deny these truths. He faced them, wrestled with them. He pushed for better algorithms, greater transparency, ethical AI practices. He wasn't trying to erase imperfection. He was trying to build systems that could course correct, that could learn, that could evolve toward fairness. While others in Silicon Valley expanded their empires into fashion, entertainment, or space tourism, Sergey returned often to science and education. He believed that the next big breakthrough wouldn't come from a product launch, but from a classroom. He began investing in quantum computing, next-gen education platforms, and neurotech. His thinking was always this: how do we accelerate human potential without losing our humanity? In private, Sergey began to mentor young researchers and thinkers. He often invited small groups of scientists, educators, and ethicists to quiet retreats, far from cameras and shareholders. He listened more than he spoke. He asked hard questions. What should we build that we haven't dared to imagine? What are the unintended consequences of the tools we love? Are we solving problems or simply creating new ones? These weren't business meetings. They were philosophical councils. And for Sergey, they were sacred. Even as his net worth soared into the tens of billions, his personal life remained strikingly grounded. He continued driving modest cars, dressing simply, and traveling with minimal security, not because he had something to prove, but because that's who he was. A man who understood that real wealth isn't in what you own, it's in what you give away. He rarely granted interviews, but when he did, his tone was always the same, curious, humble, and slightly amused at the myth people had built around him. He didn't see himself as a genius. He saw himself as a problem solver, a systems thinker, a boy from Moscow who learned that asking the right question was always more powerful than giving the fastest answer. In fact, if there's one thing Sergey Brin believes in more than answers, it's questions. It's the question that drove him to create Google, the question that led to Alphabet, the question that keeps him moving through science, health, and human rights. What if we could do better? That question still echoes in university labs, where students study with scholarships funded by his philanthropy. It hums through the machines decoding Parkinson's at a genetic level. It pulses through the small team of educators he funds to bring STEM education to rural American schools. It whispers through the corridors of innovation, reminding people that technology alone isn't enough. The heart behind it matters more. And for English learners across the U.S., whether in inner-city Detroit, the Appalachian Mountains, or the farmlands of Iowa, Sergey's story speaks in a language they understand. The language of perseverance, of quiet fire, of transformation that doesn't brag, but simply builds. Because Sergey never wanted to be a king. He wanted to be a compass. He didn't dream of control. He dreamed of clarity. He didn't talk about changing the world. He coded until the world changed. In every search bar typed in broken English. In every student teaching themselves with subtitles on. In every immigrant child who dares to dream beyond limits. They are walking proof that Sergey's mission worked. That knowledge can liberate. That technology, when led by conscience, can elevate entire generations. And maybe that's why, in a world of endless noise, Sergey Brin remains the quiet genius. Not because he disappeared, but because he empowered us all to be found. There's a quiet kind of greatness that doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need the world to look. It just needs the world to move forward. Sergey Brin's life has been that kind of greatness, a story not built on noise, but on nuance, not on fame, but on focus. He is the kind of leader who never stood at the center of the spotlight, yet somehow managed to reshape the world around it. What makes his journey so remarkable isn't just the billions earned or the company built. It's the message whispered between every line of his story. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to start from privilege to change the world. You don't need to be born in the perfect country, speak the perfect language, or have the perfect plan. What you need is a mind that refuses to stay still and a heart that refuses to give up. He began with questions, small, persistent questions. Why is access to information so limited? Why can't knowledge be free for everyone? Why do people have to suffer in silence when the tools to help them already exist? These weren't questions for someday. These were questions for now. And while most people wait for permission to act, Sergey got to work. In the shadows of Silicon Valley, he wrote code not to impress, but to improve. He engineered systems not to profit first, but to empower first. His version of revolution wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, logical, precise. And it spread like fire through every device, every screen, every voice searching for something more. The boy who once couldn't speak freely in Moscow built the tool that gave the world its loudest voice. The immigrant who once watched his parents denied opportunities created a system that gave billions of people access to possibilities they'd never dreamed of. And the student who once navigated unfamiliar schools in a foreign country gave birth to the greatest learning engine humanity has ever known. That is the real power of the Sergey Brin story, not just what he built, but why he built it. Not just what he earned, but what he gave. And for every student listening today, especially those struggling with English, with fear, with doubt, this story is not just about Sergey. It's about you. Because deep down, you have the same questions. You've wondered if you're smart enough, if your accent will hold you back, if your background makes you too different. You've asked yourself, can someone like me really make something that matters? And here is the truth, whispered in every line of Sergey's life. Yes, you can. You can be the kid in the back of the class who doesn't say much, but thinks deeply. You can be the student who stumbles over every English sentence today and still lead a company tomorrow. You can be the one who feels invisible now and become the person whose ideas light up the world. But to do that, you have to begin. You have to begin where Sergey began. Not with money, not with perfect language, not with connections, just with curiosity, with the courage to ask, what if? What if I tried? What if I learned one new thing today? What if I stopped comparing and started building? What if I failed and then tried again anyway? The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more thinkers, more builders, more hearts that beat not for fame, but for change. And that includes you. So if you're listening to this and thinking, but I'm just a student, remember? So was Sergey. If you're thinking, I don't have the resources, remember, neither did he. And if you're thinking, but my English isn't good enough, remember, he once had to learn from scratch too. He didn't let that stop him. You can't let it stop you either. From dusty libraries to glowing screens, from whispered dreams to global reality, Sergey Brin's life is a call to every quiet genius who's been told to sit still, to every learner who's ever felt behind, to every immigrant who's ever felt out of place. Your background is not a weakness. It's your beginning. It's your power. And your future? It doesn't wait for perfect timing. It begins the moment you decide to act. So act. Pick up the book. Open the browser. Ask the question. Build the idea. Learn the skill. Speak the truth. Push through the fear. Break the silence. Own your name. Create your future. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now. Because if Sergey Brin taught the world anything, it's that greatness doesn't come to those who are ready. It comes to those who are curious. And that's the most powerful force in the world. Not intelligence, not money, not fame, but curiosity backed by action. Let that be your beginning. Let that be your answer. Let that be your voice. And maybe, just maybe, someday, someone will search your name and find the light you left behind.